Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, well, that speech from David Shearer went about as well as the Facebook float did. All I can say is that was a zero response to a zero budget, not one single idea, Mr Speaker. The kindest thing I can say about that speech is it's 20 minutes of my life I'm never getting back. But don't worry, one person liked it. David Cunliffe. Yep. He was licking his chops like Scar out of Lion King. Trust me, he's ready to pounce on Simba over there. Well, seeing it's a zero budget, let me give... because it's a zero budget and there's not a lot of money to spread around, let me give some free advice to David Shearer. When David Cunliffe has a shave, be worried, OK? Because he's coming after you. So, Mr Speaker, this is all very interesting because according to... well, they were barking about that loud out of the Sky City tent at the Rugby World Cup final. But don't worry, we'll come back to them. Mr Speaker, according to David Shearer, New Zealand isn't doing very well on a relative basis. That's his proposition. Well, the trouble is to believe that, Mr Speaker, you have to live on planet Labour. You see, this is the way it goes. On planet Labour, New Zealand wasn't in recession in 2008. We didn't have an overpriced housing market that was getting out of control. We didn't have an export sector that had been in recession for 5 years. On planet Labour, the previous Labor government didn't go to their 2008 election campaign and promise a deposit guarantee scheme that ended up costing taxpayers of New Zealand billions of dollars. Mr Speaker, on planet Labour, the global financial crisis never happened. See, according to them on planet Labour, Greece is this happy little place where ruins are the sorts of things you visit rather than an apt description of their banking system. Mr Speaker, on planet Labour, the Christchurch earthquakes never happened. Never happened. Mr Speaker, on planet Labour, trillions of dollars were never wiped off the global stock exchange. And Mr Speaker, on planet Labour, 24 is the number of people that the Sky City box can host for the Rugby World Cup final, not the unemployment rate in Spain. That's what it's like on planet Labour. The trouble is that won't wash with anyone because back in the real world, New Zealanders actually know what's going on. They know there is a global economic crisis, and in their own homes, they are doing exactly what this government is doing. They are saving. They are paying off their debt. They are being conservative with what they do. In the real world, New Zealanders in their homes know that you have to earn your way in the world. The only response they have on planet Labour is to spend money that comes from someone else. You don't earn it, you just borrow it and spend it. Mr Speaker, well, in the end, when you spend more money than you earn, it's called Greece. And you go broke, Mr Speaker. So David Shearer said there wasn't much good to feel about in terms of the New Zealand economy. Apparently, it's all bad at the moment. So let's have a look. According to a range of economists, over the next 3 years, New Zealand will grow faster than the United States, the United Kingdom, the entire Eurozone, Canada, Japan. In fact, that's right. Mr Speaker, and you were educated in Australia, not Mr Australia, although I'm sure you would look good against the other contestants, but Mr Speaker, he would have won. Mr Speaker, we will be growing at the same rate as a minerally very wealthy Australia over the next 3 years. But says, no, that's not good enough. That's not good enough. Let's have a look at unemployment. Let's have a look at unemployment. And yes, the unemployment rate in New Zealand is higher than we would like at 6.7%. Let's acknowledge that. But let's also acknowledge the following. Mr. Speaker, more people have jobs in New Zealand than ever before in our history. More people have jobs. That's right. They are the facts. Over the last 2 years, 60,000 jobs have been created in this economy. 60,000, and 154,000 will be created in the next 4 years. Mr. Speaker, more people are employed as a percentage of the population in New Zealand than in Australia. More people are employed. And thanks to the Minister of Social Development, there are a touch over 50,000 people on the unemployment benefit in New Zealand at the moment. That is 14,000 less than 18 months ago. And apparently, all that's not good enough. So, Mr. Speaker, let's have a look at the unemployment rate just for a moment. Because New Zealand's unemployment rate is lower than just a few countries. In fact, it's lower than Chile's, the Czech Republic, Belgium, Canada, remarkably Finland, Sweden, Denmark, all of Britain, America, it is true, Slovakia, Italy, France, Poland, Hungary, Estonia, Slovak Republic, Ireland, Portugal, Greece and Spain, and that's only including the OECD. They are all the countries that have a higher unemployment rate than New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, the National-led government has been very ably supported by our friends at ACT and United Future and the Māori Party, and we thank them for their support and contribution to this budget. They are sensible people who are committed to growth, jobs and economic stability. So anyway, apparently, if I did pick anything up from David Shearer's speech, on Planet Labour, it's easy to create jobs. Apparently pretty easy. So, let's play a little test, shall we? Okay. So let us go through all the pro-growth initiatives and let's just see for a moment which ones the inhabitants of Planet Labour are in favour of. Okay, so starting off, let me give you a small tip. It's longer than Letterman's top 10, but we'll come back to that in a moment. So number one, do they support future intensification and development of our agricultural sector? No, they do not. No, they want to put them out of business last time. Do they want more mining or oil and gas exploration? No. Okay. Do they even want Australian companies moving jobs to New Zealand? No. Do they want welfare reform and mutual obligation? No. Did they support the 90-day probation period? Do they support any of our labour market reforms? Did they support the $1.5 billion we put into ultra-fast broadband? Okay. Did they support foreign investment in New Zealand? No. Did they support the 3,000 jobs that came off making the 2 Hobbit movies? No, the Hobbit haters, as I said last year. Do they support the National Convention Centre? I tell you what, though, they'll go to the opening, I reckon. Probably. They'll go to the opening. Hey. They'll get it. Well, actually, that's assuming David Shearer actually knows there's an opening, because we apparently didn't know we were building a convention centre, which we announced in June with Sky City, and went off to the World Cup that was in October, apparently, anyway. Do they support public sector reform? No. Do they want a less onerous emissions trading system? No. Do they support irrigation of the South Island, all parts of the North Island? Do they support roads of national significance? Do they support... No, they don't. Exactly, they don't. Do they support reform of local government? No. And do they support $5 to $7 billion coming out of the mixed ownership model going into 21st century schools? That's right. They've agreed. They've passed the test. They don't agree with any pro-growth initiative at all. Not one of them. didn't have one pro-growth initiative in his speech, but on Planet Labour, where the three Davids like each other and Grant Robinson isn't really auditioning to be the next leader, money grows on trees and jobs are easy to create. Mr Speaker, I give up on them because that's what the rest of New Zealand's done. It ain't like that in the real world. Mr Speaker, let's go on to the budget for a moment. It was a very sensible budget for uncertain times. Very sensible budget. But let's have a look what it delivers. Health, $1.5 billion into health over the next 4 years. $1.5 billion. There will be more New Zealanders getting elective surgery, 4,000 extra elective surgical operations. Mr Speaker, more money going into cancer care, more money to support people in New Zealand, following a government that its first action was to fully pay for Herceptin for women in New Zealand that have breast cancer. Mr Speaker, free after-hours doctors' visits for under 6, more money for maternity care, more money for dementia care, and more money to eradicate a third world disease like rheumatic fever. That is what comes in Budget 2012. And Mr Speaker, all of that new expenditure comes because this government knows how to manage the economy. And it doesn't just borrow money from other people, it makes savings. Mr Speaker, let's go to education. $512 million more over the next 4 years. That is a spend of just under $10 billion. They talk tough over there. This is the party that's actually putting more money into ECE for vulnerable Maori and Pacific kids. That's what's happening. This is the party that's lifting participation rates for early childhood education. This is the party that's putting more money into school lots grants. This is the party that's putting more money into professional development so that we can have better teaching outcomes for our kids. Mr Speaker, this is the party that's putting $1 billion into 21st century schools. And this is the party that's putting money into the youth mental health program. So let us talk for a moment about those class sizes. Let's have that conversation on nationwide TV right here and right now, because this is what's happened. In the last decade, the number of teachers in New Zealand has gone up 12.5%. So we approximately have about 50,000 teachers in this country. In the last decade, it went up 12.5%. At exactly the same time, the number of children went up 2.5%. And the outcomes we're receiving from those schools have broadly plateaued. So, here's our chance. Here's our chance to actually focus on teaching outcomes and quality teaching for all of those 52,000 teachers and kids. And just so we understand what's happening, if your child goes to school, and we hope they do, for 13 years, in every one of those years, so for 4 of those years out of 13, the class sizes will rise. In 3 of them, they'll actually fall, and in 6, they'll stay the same. And when David Shearer said before, oh, by the way, it was 1 to 15 and it might go to 1 to 28 next time, well, actually the ratio was pretty similar before that, and for 90% of New Zealand schools across the country, the change will be either plus or minus 1 teacher. So let's answer this question. Do we want a few more teachers in this country, or do we want to pour money into lifting teacher quality and teacher outcomes? And if you don't believe me, in your workplace, ask your mate this. Do you want your child sitting in front of a teacher that's a really good teacher that's committed to the outcome of your kid with quality professional development when there's 16 kids in the class? Or do you want to have a situation where there's only 15 in the class but the teacher is no good and doesn't get the quality professional development? Well, I know which one I'd rather have, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let's have a look at welfare. This is a party that's prepared to tackle the fact that 12% of New Zealand's working age population on a benefit. It has to change. It should be a lower number. They deserve better choices and better outcomes for their families, and we're investing $287 million into more childhood, more training, more education for those people. Mr. Speaker, this is a party that believes in science and innovation, puts its money where its mouth is, $326 million into science and education. $166 million into the Advanced Technological Institute, $60 million into the National Science Challenge, $100 million to PBRF, more funding for engineers and scientists. And Mr. Speaker, yes, there will be $5 to $7 billion coming out of the mixed ownership model, and yes, it will go to building 21st century schools and hospitals and the Advanced Technological Institute. And this is the truth. The balance sheet of New Zealand, the assets New Zealanders own, will be going up over the next 5 years. They won't be going down. So, Mr. Speaker, let's put it like this. The world is a pretty tough place, and it's been tough for the last 4 years. Yes, there's been a global financial crisis. Yes, there's been earthquakes in Christchurch. Yes, there's been a recession that we've had to inherit. But in that time, this government has got on top of the mess we inherited from these people. We've got the export sector starting to grow. We're starting to properly fund ourselves. We'll be back in surplus by 2014 and 15. We've protected the entitlements for the vast bulk of New Zealanders. And in years to come, when they look back on this government, will they say, thank goodness they're there and there's not all this debt? Or will they say, we wish we had those people who live on planet Labour who just want to spend money from people who live on planet Mars or some other place and one day have to pay it back with interest? That's not leadership. That's passing the buck to a future generation of New Zealanders. They're wrong. Mr. Speaker, this is a good budget for the times. Bill English has done a great job.
Order. Dr. Russell Norman.